So let me get this straight. Let's start from the beginning. Alexander Povetkin was due to square off against Deontay Wilder. A great fight. In my opinion, the number 3 heavyweight on the planet versus the number 4 heavyweight on the planet at the time of that fight being made. A truly, truly great fight. Alexander Povetkin tests positive for a performance-enhancing drug and the fight doesn't go down. Povetkin gets some sort of reprieve based on the fact that the substance he tested positive for wasn't historically banned, and as such there could be the suggestion that he took it before the ban and trace elements of this substance have remained in his system. Deeply, deeply dubious, but Povetkin isn't banned off the back of that result. Now, long-term viewers of this channel will know that I have been suspicious of Povetkin prior to that ban. His apparent change in build, his apparent change in knockout power, all of these things came after a loss to Vladimir Klitschko. He appeared to go away and have developed devastating one-punch knockout power. If you look back at Povetkin's early career, he was a guy who always carried quite a bit of puppy fat on him. He was a guy who often went the distance against heavyweights. We see him coming back after that loss to Klitschko. Physically, he's muscled up a lot. He's a lot stronger, he's a lot firmer, he's a lot less fleshy. He scores devastating knockouts over Mike Perez. Mike Perez, who has an excellent chin, knocked out in devastating fashion inside a round. Manuel Char knocked out in devastating fashion. Carlos Takam knocked out in devastating fashion. For me, this was a dubious change in fortunes for Alexander Povetkin that coincided with a change in build and that coincided with a failed drug test against Deontay Wilder. Nevertheless, Povetkin wasn't banned, we all got on with our lives. Povetkin versus Stiverne was then announced. On the run-up to the fight, Stiverne tested positive for some sort of substance. Again, seemingly, Stiverne was given some sort of reprieve based on the fact that this substance that he tested positive for could have been consumed from, unintentionally. Whatever, bizarre. Now, at the 11th hour, the day before, or the day even of the fight, Alexander Povetkin has failed an additional drug test for a different banned substance. Very, very, very confusing. Understand it's the same substance that other fighters, including heavyweight Lucas Brown, have tested positive for. This is a really, really confusing set of situations. You've got to ask yourself, as a fan of heavyweight boxing, how many of the top 20 in the sport have had some allegations or scandals relating to performance-enhancing drugs now? Tyson Fury, Hughie Fury, Antonio Tarver, Lucas Brown, Alexander Povetkin, Stiverne. Those are just a few that I've rattled off the top of my head without really even considering. I'm sure if I actually pulled up BoxRec and went through the list, there'd be a hell of a load more. Who can forget Erkan Tepe and that ridiculous drug scandal that he was embroiled in? So what I'm getting at is another big fight ruined on fight week involving Alexander Povetkin due to failed drug tests. But this is boxing. This is one of the most bizarre sports in the world. This isn't Premier League football. This isn't rugby. This isn't cricket. This is boxing. And Team Povetkin have been able to get a replacement at the 11th hour. Stiverne's flying off. Now, you would assume Povetkin, after a second failed drug test, would be facing an extended period of absence from the sport. You would assume he'd be hiding under his bed, scared to show his face. Incorrect. The guy is fighting tonight, and he's fighting a top heavyweight, Johan de Par. You could actually make an argument Johan de Par Povetkin is a better fight than Povetkin Stiverne. De Par was last seen knocking out Robert Helenius. De Par gave Deontay Wilder a very good scrap. Johan de Par's a highly rated guy. We understand he was sparring in Russia ahead of a fight he's got lined up, and he's been called in at the 11th hour. Now, again, for me, this is dubious. This is highly, highly dubious. Number one, was De Par already lined up as a potential replacement? Did they know there was a likelihood of Povetkin failing some sort of drug test? And, was De Par already in the loop about the need to potentially stand in? Number two, how can we allow this as a sport, a fight like this, to continue? We're in an age where I strongly believe in the next 5 to 10 years there are going to be increasing demands to ban boxing and to ban our sport. We're a society that's becoming less and less accustomed to violence. We're a society who is, more and more mindful of health and well-being and, moving away from blood sports, let's put it that way. We've had awful situations recently. We've had situations like the Nick Blackwell situation where the guy has sustained a hideous injury in the ring, and yet boxing has not done what it should have done to protect Nick Blackwell. Nick Blackwell then suffered a repeat health problem from sparring against licensed boxers in a boxing ring. Bizarre. We've had the Mike Towell situation where a bloke died in the ring. This is a dangerous time for boxing. And what are we allowing to happen? A guy in the heavyweight division, a guy with known knockout power, who hits very, very hard, one of the hardest punches in the sport, will be going up against a guy tonight, having failed 2 drug tests in the previous year, one of which in the previous week. He'll be going up against a guy in Johan de Par, who apparently is taking the fight on 1 day's notice. A guy on 1 day's notice will be facing one of the biggest punchers in the division, in the heavyweight division, who's failed 2 drug tests. Now, I sincerely hope the fight passes without incident. I sincerely hope both guys leave the ring without any injury and are allowed to, complete their careers and complete their lives in the fashion that they would hope. But what I would say is, if Johan de Par is the victim of a chilling knockout this evening, Johan de Par is also a guy famed for his durability. So if Johan de Par, perhaps even more worryingly, is the victim of a sustained beatdown, having taken the fight on 1 day's notice against such a big puncher, and if he were to suffer injury off the back of that, I'm afraid, in my humble opinion, sitting here on my flat with the wallpaper up behind me, this is something that would be to blame on boxing. And for people worried about the image of the sport, for people worried about the continued presence of boxing, for people worried about participation in boxing and people becoming fans of boxing or departing being fans of boxing, this is the kind of fight that can do untold damage. As I say, Alexander Povetkin, for me, he should be a guy hiding. He should be a guy running from the press right now. He should be a guy contemplating retirement. He should be a guy worrying as to whether the police are going to come and arrest him. But no, he's actually going to be fighting tonight. He's going to be fighting against a guy who's come in, supposedly, as we're asked to believe, on 1 day's notice. Very, very, very dangerous. Not a good look for the sport at all. And we're at a point in boxing now where it is really, really hard to keep track of who's got a ban, who hasn't got a ban. We've had guys like Lucas Brown, banned, then unbanned, then banned again. Povetkin failing a drug test, then getting a reprieve, then failing another drug test. Even guys like Tyson Fury, who I'm a fan of, having some sort of UCAD hearing and then retiring and then no one hearing about the hearing. It really is impossible to keep track of what's going on in the heavyweight division. What I will say, for me personally, Povetkin's entire career is tainted now off the back of this. He's a guy who, as I've alluded to, I've always had suspicions over. But can you really look back on any of his successes? Can you look back on his Olympic successes? Can you look back on his professional successes? And can you give Alexander Povetkin any credit? For me, I don't think so. I think that somebody who's failed a drug test and has then proceeded to take drugs for the fight immediately following on from that, has such little regard for the rules and such little regard for the testing procedures. You have to assume that they are potentially an individual who has spent their whole career, their whole lives behaving in that manner. I no longer have interest in seeing Povetkin Wilder. I no longer have interest in seeing Povetkin Joshua, Povetkin Fury. I no longer want to see those fights. For me, Povetkin, on his day, a great, great fighter. On his day, a great, great puncher. But for me, irreparably tainted, and a guy who has done a lot of damage to the sport that I love as far as I'm concerned. Povetkin de Par, had this fight been under other circumstances, I'd actually be quite intrigued. I'd actually be quite excited to watch it. Now I'll be watching it behind my fingers, hoping that we don't see an injury to Johan de Par, and hoping that de Par has actually not taken this fight against such a dangerous opponent on 1 day's notice. Let me know your thoughts, people. I'm interested to hear your take on this. What should boxing do in circumstances such as this? If you've enjoyed the video, take the time to hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please press subscribe. If you're a fan of heavyweight boxing, I'm going to do an extended video tomorrow on the Hughie Fury situation, potentially with world title opportunities against Deontay Wilder and against Joseph Parker. We're going to look ahead to those two potential matchups and discuss how those would play out. So if you're a fan of heavyweight boxing, please press subscribe so you can be notified when that video goes live and so you don't miss out. Cheers everyone, have a good weekend.